Hey, how's it going? I hope you're doing well. I hope your day's been going good. Like I mentioned, I wanted to share a little bit of what God's been doing in my life, especially this past year and a half. It started with, I've got to go back to this a few years ago. My wife read this book and she was like, "You've got to read this." And I kept pushing it aside. But finally, I did. It was this book. I don't know if you guys have read this, but John Mark Comer, Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. Oh my gosh, it was such a good book. How to stay emotionally healthy and spiritually alive in the chaos of the modern world. It was a book that I needed. I think this was 5 years ago that I picked it up and started reading it. It was such a game changer for me, especially talking about the importance of rest and how we can be caught up in this hurried lifestyle and we miss out on life when we're so hurried. And so, great book. It really spoke to me a lot. Well, a couple of years ago, I picked it up again just because I wanted to revisit some of the things. Sometimes you read a good book and you're like, what else was there and what was the main points? And I started reading it, and typically I don't read the forward of a book, but I did for this one, and I thought, who wrote the forward? And it was so interesting. The forward was written by John Ortberg, and I'd heard about him. I hadn't read any of his books by that point, but as I read his forward and I just read what he talked about with regards to hurry, and how both he and John Mark Comer were connected to either directly to Dallas or Dallas's writings. I think John Mark hasn't had the opportunity to meet Dallas, but John Ortberg was good friends with Dallas, and so the connection was really interesting. So I mentioned that to a couple of friends of mine, and they said, "Oh, if you're reading John Ortberg stuff, you've got to start with this book, Soul Keeping." And I'm so glad I listened to them. First of all, when your wife tells you to read a book, read it, because you never know what that road would lead to. And so I'm glad she suggested that book to me, because that led me to this book. And I'm telling you, this was such an important book. And it's played a critical role in my life. It forced me to ask a question that I don't think I'd ever asked myself up to that point. And I'll share that in just a bit, but I gotta it kind of explain context. I was I journal a little bit, not too long, but a couple of lines here and there. And one of the things that God had showed me as I just gotten into this book was about the passage Isaiah 6. And this is what I wrote. In Isaiah 6, we see this picture of the prophet having this vision of God. He realized how unclean he was, and he's overcome by the grace and love of God. And you see this moment of surrender, but then you see him saying, "God, what can I do for you? Here I am, send me. I'm here for you. I'll do whatever you want me to do." And this is what I wrote. That vision of God combined with a surrendered heart can lead to some incredible things. And for me, I had experienced that because I had an incredible encounter with God and I surrendered my life. And I'm one of those like all in kind of people. And that decision to follow God led me to, I'll do whatever you want. And so I saw that in my life. A surrendered heart can lead to some incredible things because I saw God move in some awesome ways. And you see people being reached and doors being open. And I thought that was incredible. But unfortunately, there's a real danger of replacing the vision of God that we had with the things that we see him do. The best way that I can explain this is there's this guy, Henry Nouwen, I think is how you say his name. He's a theologian, Dutch Catholic priest actually. And he says it like this: "Nothing conflicts with the love of Christ like service to Christ." And I found myself in this place where my love for Christ had been overtaken by my service to Christ. And I had been living this busy life of just do, until I came across this book, Soul Keeping. And I'm telling you, this messed me up because the question it forced me to ask is, how's your soul doing? And I don't think I had ever asked myself that question. How's your soul doing? And let me read a little bit from this book. This is just from the introduction. Now I start reading the introduction. But this is John Orberg and Dallas Willard having a conversation, and Dallas is telling him this: the most important thing in your life, Dallas said, is not what you do, it's who you become. The most important thing is not what you do, it's who you become. That's what you will take into eternity, Dallas says. You are an unceasing spiritual being with an eternal destiny in God's great universe. He goes on to say that's the most important thing for you to know about you. And you hear John just processing these thoughts. And John, he says later on, when I thought about how my life was going, I always thought about my outer world. It is a world of reputation and appearance. It consists of how much I have and of what people think. It is visible and obvious. In my outer world, this is so true, it is easy to keep score. I always thought that improving the circumstances of my outer world is what makes me feel happy inside. But this was an invitation to another world, what Gordon MacDonald would call a private world. It is unseen, unknown, and hidden. It would garner no applause. It could be chaotic and dark and disordered, and no one might know. I think the ruthless illumination of hurry, just this whole concept of resting, allowed me to slow down just enough so that I could hear this question and really take it to heart. How's my soul doing? Because I too, like John mentioned, I was more worried about my outer world. I was thinking about reputation, appearance, what am I accomplishing? How am I growing? It was it was good things, but somehow it had distracted me from the main thing. How's my soul doing? How's my soul connected to my Savior? Those were questions that I began to ask, and I didn't know. I didn't know how to answer them. And in fact, I had filled my life with so much doing that it was hard for me to really sift through all the doing so that I could just be still and hear from God and just really take this to Him. In fact, today, there was a video that John and his wife Nancy Orberg released. Both he and Nancy were talking about just who we really are and the conflict we find in ourselves. In fact, what I'll do is in my stories, I'll share that. But this was the journey that started for me by asking that simple question: how's your soul doing? I had gotten to a point where I was so busy that finding time to even pray was hard. And so what I'd do was I'd catch moments here and there, and mind you, it was not hard because it was not hard just because I was busy and I didn't have time. It was hard because it was just hard for me to sit with God. And because it was hard for me to sit with Him, I filled my time with just anything and everything I could do for Him. And I'm married. Meryl and I have been married. We'll be married this year, 18 years. If I spent our entire relationship just here and there sending her a text and saying, "Hi, I hope you're doing good," and just these momentary conversations, I don't think we'd have a healthy married life. The reason we have a healthy married life today is because we spend time together. And so I know that. And so if I want a healthy relationship with God, why am I not spending time with Him? Why is my soul so busy? Why is my soul so at unrest that I cannot sit still just to seek Him and talk to Him and spend time in prayer and spend time in His Word? It had gotten so difficult for me to do that I just told myself different things and started avoiding it. Now, I wasn't in my mind far away from God, but I realized that I hadn't grown closer to Him in a long time. And so that question started me on this journey. And what I'd like to do is continue this conversation here in the next couple of days and just share from the book things that I've learned. But I want to encourage you, ask yourself that question: how's your soul doing? Is your soul so hurried and busy that you don't You're unable to even see past, the task list that you have. God didn't create you to live that kind of a life. Let me repeat again what Dallas said, if I can find it. Um, Here it is. The most important thing in your life is not what you do, it's who you become. That's what you will take into eternity, because you are an unceasing spiritual being with an eternal destiny in God's great universe. That took a little bit of time for me to understand and process, but I want to encourage you. Ask yourself that question. How's my soul doing? And let's go on this journey together. Have a great day.